Welcome back. So now that we have our user interface, we can start coding now the events that will be happening on this form. So if we analyze the form, we have four events. The first one is during the form load, which means that when the form loads, we'll have to make sure that we populate this list box that's coming from the drawings in this folder. So that is one event. The second one is when the user clicks on the browse button here, we will display a dialog screen so he can navigate through the folder locations and select the particular folder where the drawings are stored. So that is the second event. And the third one is the update drawing text style button, where we're going to update whatever the drawings we have in this list box from the old text style to a new text style. And finally, we have the cancel button to just unload the form. So let's code all of these events one at a time. First, the form load event. So if you just click anywhere on the form, not inside the control, maybe somewhere here, double click on that, you will have this method created for you by Visual Studio. So currently this is just what we have. We need to make sure that we import those libraries that we will be using during our coding. So the first thing that we have to do is to import those libraries. Type in the imports system.drawing. Another one is imports system.windows.forms. And finally, the system.io for the input output. This will be used for the file dialog. Okay, so now we have this first event, the form load event. When this form load, we should populate the list box. So that particular event will also behave similarly when the user click on the browse button. So the better approach to do that is to create a separate method. Let's call that as private sub populate list box, and we will just be accepting a path of the drawing. So create a variable here by val dwg path as a string. Okay, so all we need to do here is call this method and pass the path location. Then this method will handle the population of the list box. So let's call that now as populate list box, and we have to pass in the path of the drawing, which in our case we have already provided in the txt path text control. So all we have to do is pass that value, the text that trim. Make sure that we get rid of the extra spaces. So this is done already for the form load event. Call this method and it will populate for us. So now let's code on this populate list box method. The first thing that we should do is to clear the list box, the list DWG box, so that we don't keep on appending the drawings in that particular control. So lstdwgs dot items dot clear, which means that every time this method is called, we are going to clear the content of the list box. Now we will be using the folder browser dialog object. So type in using FBD, just an initial for abbreviation for the folder browser dialog. That will be new folder browser dialog. Now FBD, that selected path, will be the path that's being passed in here. So DWG path. Now we need to have a variable that will gather all the drawings in that folder. So we can use the, let's call that as files, as a string. That will be an array of string, and that is coming from the directory object that get files. I specify the path, which is the FBD, that selected path, and asterisk that DWG. This is the pattern, which means that we are only getting all those files with DWG extension. Now that we have all the files in this variable, we can loop through that variable using the for each statement and then add into the list box. So use the for each statement here, and then for each DWG or any variable that you can put there as string in files in this variable here. So we have to add into our lstdwg list box. So lstdwg is that items that add and the drawing file, and that's it. So once it's done, all we have to do is just provide the user with info that text equals total number of drawings equals, and then concatenate with the actual items in the list box. So lstdwgs that items that count. There you go. So we are done with our method. Now we can use this when we do the browse click event. So let's go back to our code. You can right click here and view designer if it's not open in the tab here. So either way you can do both. So now let's double click on this button, so it will create for us a method here. Now all we have to do there is use the same folder browser dialog so that the user will see a dialog where he can choose or pick the folder location. So using FBD equals new folder browser dialog, then we need a variable to store the result of the selected path. So dim result equals, or dim result as dialog result equals FBD that show dialog. So now the dialog box is showing to the user. Then when he clicks on any folder, we have just to validate if result equals dialog result that OK, and also the selected path is not null, or it's not a white space, and we pass on the FBD that selected path. Then we can now call this method so that whatever drawing in this location will be populated into the list box also. So populate list box, we have just to pass the FBD that selected path, and also we have to update this text box with the new path that the user selected. So txt path dot text equals fbd dot selected path. There you go. So that's it for our btn browse event. Next, we can now code the, let's start just with the cancel here. So we'll get this done very quickly. Cancel, all we have to do here is close the form, which means that update text style form dot active form dot close, and that's it for the cancel. And finally, we have just one event left. So if we double click on this btn update, it will also create another method for us, so we can start coding this. So let us declare some variables that we will be needing. So the first one is, let me just call this as I, as integer. This will be used to track the number of drawing files that's been processed. So let's just initialize to 1. And we need to have the old text style value that is coming from this text box, and also the new style from this text box. Okay, so let me just call that as dim old text style as a string that will be equal to txt style old the text that trim. Same thing with the new text style as a string equals txt text style new that text that trim. Now we need the total count for all the drawings. So dim total count is just also for monitoring as integer equals lstdwgs that items that count. There you go. So now we have all the variables that we will be needing. And finally, we will need to instantiate a class or an object. The actual processing of updating the text style will be happening not in this form, but we are going to create a separate class that will store all those code to do the actual processing by updating the text style. So let's create this class now. Right click on your project and add class. We will be calling this as text style util. That will be our utility class. And now we have it here. So in this class, we will be creating one method that is a public method that will be called from the user interface. So let's call this method as public sub process update style. And in this method, we will be accepting 3 parameters. The first one is the path of the drawing, and the old style and the new style. So by val dwg path as string. Then the next one is by val old text style as string. And finally the new text style as string. That will be our method. So we will continue coding on this in the next upcoming videos, but for now let's just create a scaffolding for this method so that we can complete our user interface code. So let's go back to our form, the code behind. Now we can instantiate that utility class. So let me just call that as dim TSU for TextStyle util as TextStyle util equals new TextStyle util. So now that we have this utility, we can now loop through the list, the list box, the LSTDWGs, and then start processing one drawing at a time. So we will be using the for each statement there. So for each DWG file as a string in LSTDWGs.items. So let us provide the user with information. LBL info that text equals just saying that processing, and we concatenate the I. Let's say I dot to string. So we initialize the value of I to 1, which means that the message here will be saying processing 1 of, and then concatenate again the total count, which we have here, the total count of the drawings in the list box. So total count that to string, and then just enclose that in a parenthesis also. And we will also append the file name of the drawing so that the user knows that that particular drawing is being processed. And let's also make that color to green, color that green. Okay, so now we have to call the method that we just created from this TextStyle util. So tsu dot process update style, and we will pass on 3 parameters: DWG file, and the old TextStyle, and the new TextStyle. There you go. And we have to make sure that we increment the value of I. Otherwise, it will always be processing 1 of 10, 1 of 10, even though we are looping here multiple times already. So we have to make sure that the I is incremented using the I plus equals 1, which means that processing 1 of 10, processing 2 of 10, 3 of 10, and so on and so forth. And that's it. So all we have to do now, when everything is done, when the processing is done, we'll just have to provide the user with the final message here, saying that updating of text styles completed successfully. Okay. You can add here the try catch block also if you want, but this is just very straightforward process, so I leave it as is. And that should be our completed code for the user interface. We have handled all of the events that will be happening here. So for your practice also later on, you can provide some validation just to make sure that the text style are specified properly, that this is not blank or empty. That's just for your exercise later on. It's very straightforward, very simple. Okay, so that's it for our user interface code. In the next video, we will be completing our TextStyle utility code here, the class. I'll see you there.